I'm going to hide this audio file when I'm finished. If none of us make it, at least there'll be some kind of record. Storm's been hitting us hard now for 48 hours, and we still have nothing to go on. One other thing. I think it rips through your podcast when it takes you over. Richard found some deleted audio tracks, but the metadata was missing. They could be anybody's. Nobody trusts anybody now. We're all very tired. Nothing else I can do. Just wait. This is J.L. Harleman, Reformed Church pastor, PT episode 174.
You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to episode 174 of Popcorn Theology. I'm Kathryn.
And I'm David.
And I'm James.
How you doing, old boy?
I don't know who to trust.
Yeah, I know what you mean, James. Trust's a tough thing to come by these days. Tell you what, why don't you trust in the Lord?
See, now you guys know why I love this movie. Kurt Russell calls a character to faith. Look at that. And it's Wilford Brimley, no less.
Wait, that was Wilford Brimley?
Yeah.
I'm not used to seeing him from anything but the diabetes commercials. I genuinely have not recognized him. Looking it up now. Trust but verify. I don't trust you, James. I'm going to check it out.
He was cast so that they would have a character nobody would think could possibly be bad. And when you're dealing with a movie where you're not sure who's good or bad, it helps throw everybody off.
I tell you what, if I'd known that was Wilford Brimley going into this movie, I don't know why, but it would have had a very different feel. I would have felt the same way. I would have thought, like, oh, well, it's the guy. He's the diabetes guy. Oh, no, he was famous for a reason. That's right.
Take your diabetes medication or you'll be turned into the Thing.
Yeah, exactly. When my blood sugar gets too high, just bad stuff happens.
I'd really like horrible. To come inside now.
Yeah.
Wait. So wait, where's Richard?
Oh, I cut his line. We were coming back to the Google Hangout, and I started thinking maybe he wasn't human.
Did you at least do a blood test?
David, I think it's more important we address the estrogen in the room. What's a woman doing here?
Well, since there were none in the movie, it seemed appropriate to add some female perspective here.
Well, it's great to have you here, Kathryn. It is good to have the female perspective, although this isn't a movie that, when I was watching it, I was thinking, I got to know what a woman thinks about this particular movie. It's not that type of movie in my mind. I'm a little surprised that the two of you are into this together. Is this a family sort of favorite, or what is that? What is the deal there?
Well, I mean, one could argue that James made me. It is one of his favorite films, but I actually do have a great appreciation for it myself.
Nice. You didn't, it wasn't like a first date movie or anything, was it?
No, that was the X-Files.
Nice.
Which makes sense, because the episode, I believe it's called Ice, in the first season of X-Files, was basically an homage to the Thing.
Oh, well, there you go. I'm thinking of the character in Stranger Things, who, it's the teacher, and I think that he's showing his girlfriend a scene from the Thing, and that's why I recognized when it happened in the movie. I'm like, oh, that's what they were watching in Stranger Things, because clearly I hadn't seen it before that point. So I had the reverse version of what most people had when they saw that scene.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just watching Bumblebee with for Mother's Day, because that's what I make my mom watch when it's, when she's over. Mom, you got to watch this Transformers movie. But it's set in the 80s, and the geek kid that lives across the street has a big Thing poster up too. So it was kind of odd. It was like, wait, the Thing is popping up all over the place this weekend.
Nice.
But this, as most of our listeners probably know, this is the second week of Monster Mayhem, as it were. And last week we did Kong, and so hopefully people enjoyed that episode. And next week we'll be diving into The Fly, which is one of Richard's favorite monster movies.
Yeah, I hope he makes it back by then. That would be a little awkward to go on without him, but
or someone that looks like him.
Yeah. we'll settle for a copy, an impersonation.
So Kathryn, since you and I have seen it many times, what if somebody has not yet watched The Thing and they're like, well, should I watch this and listen to the podcast, or so? What's the thing about?
Well, basically, there's a research station in Antarctica, early winter, 1982. It starts where that base, the U.S. base, is buzzed by a helicopter from a Norwegian research station. They appear to be chasing down and trying to kill a dog. After members of the U.S. team fly to the Norwegian base, they discover that all of them are dead or missing, and they find the remains of a strange creature that the Norwegians burned. They deduce it's an alien life form that can take over and assimilate into other life forms, including humans. Tensions escalate as anyone at the base might now be inhabited by the thing from another world. It's kind of it in a nutshell. I would do one small caveat for those listening to the podcast. It is rated R. It's rated R for a reason. There is a lot of body horror and violence. And while I love it and I think it has a lot to say, I did want to throw out a small caveat to those who might be a little bit sensitive to that type of content.
Like me,
That's
for
true.
example.
How do you handle it, David?
Well, I appreciate the warning now, Kathryn. Thank you.
Glad I could help.
No, it was good. I was not as traumatized as I thought I would be. So hopefully in about a week or two, I'll be able to sleep through the night again. So thank you for that. Yeah, just be aware that it is, body horror is a good way to put it without getting too much into it. But anyway.
Well, this was 1982. It definitely shocked people at that time. In fact, if people do their research, it was so horrifying at the time. It was basically vilified, and that overwhelmed anybody really looking at the performances. It actually did really poorly. It's only on home video and later that now it's considered one of the best horror movies of the 80s. Then it was actually a bomb, and it got sort of vilified by a lot of different people. It was a weird year. Another film that did poorly and came out the same day was actually one of my actually my favorite film of all time, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. And
wow.
They both had unfavorable reactions at the premiere, but then later have become renowned for a variety of reasons. So it's definitely strange for those who may not have watched it. If you like Stranger Things, if you like The X-Files, even Futurama, Resident Evil 4, Tomb Raider 3, The Faculty, Slither, or The Mist, like all of these stories and their creators would cite The Thing as an influence. And so that just really kind of was an interesting facet for me. Several filmmakers, including Guillermo del Toro, would cite it as an influence, J.J. Abrams, Neil Blomkamp, Edgar Wright. And here's something I learned too. The 2015 Tarantino movie, The Hateful Eight, it actually, in at least in Tarantino's mind, takes numerous cues from The Thing, replicating the themes of mistrust, and he even used pieces of Ennio Morricone's unused score for The Thing. He repurposed them. He found old stuff that wasn't used for the movie and repurposed it for The Hateful Eight. That's devotion.
Not to mention Kurt Russell's in both.
Oh, that's true.
That's devotion and maybe a little bit of copyright infringement, I'm thinking.
One could argue it's Tarantino.
the sincerest form of flattery, plagiarism is, they say. But yeah, no, it's, and it's kind of, it's fitting and it's surprising to me to see how influential it was. Not being a fan of, I think, any of those things that you listed, with the exception of a handful of Futurama episodes and Stranger Things, the connections are a bit lost on me, but I'm sure if you're listening to this episode, odds are you're more in the Harleman camp than in the Lee camp on the side of the horror side. But I will say, as an outsider to horror, I thought it was quite good. So if you're tempted to not give it a chance, I would reconsider. Maybe listen to, up until the spoiler warning, and then a lot that there's, tremendous. It's 1982, for goodness sakes. We're not super serious about the spoiler stuff, but it's still worth, depth of the story, to have a break there. So
well, and it's not supernatural. And I think a lot of times with horror, if it's a slasher film or if it's supernatural, I think people usually have more cautions. This is a science fiction dealing with extraterrestrial stuff. So although it's visually shocking, it's not the same. Like you said, I mean, yeah, as you said before the podcast, it really hasn't given you nightmares or anything. So
Right.
it's in a different category than some films. If slasher films keep you up at night, or if the supernatural stuff keeps you up at night, it's like, well, this is Alien. So if you enjoy Alien stuff, if you've watched the Aliens films, I mean, you've seen a lot of this. You've seen different levels of some gore and body stuff with the Aliens films. That may be a better comparison.
Yeah. But if you have a pet husky, I do wonder if this has ruined your dog for you a bit. Hopefully not, but
never look the same again. Well, I guess the first question and maybe Kathryn, you can go first. What things did we like? I'm going to work that the whole podcast.
You said I think you said replicating earlier, and I was like, replicate.
What
things did we like about the film? Ladies first.
Honestly, I think some of the physical effects are quite astounding. I think they hold up remarkably well considering it was 82. I appreciate that they were just intensely practical effects, so they hold up remarkably well. I think the soundtrack is fantastic. It's such a minimal soundtrack, and yet it completely adds to the slow burn of paranoia. And then there's these bursts of grotesquerie that are absolutely shocking. But I think the whole thing works to produce an effect in the viewer that gives you then that same mistrust of sort of the film and the characters with this added benefit that you really have no idea what is possible and what's going to happen.
I think I noticed at this time, and I don't know if it's a new thought or not. I've seen the film so many times, but listening to the soundtrack, it's like a heartbeat. It's like bump, 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 bump. It's got such a rhythmic sort of 2-beat thing going on. I think it almost is like it's like your heart rate.
Yeah.
And so there's just like Jaws, another minimal, you just some of that simpleness. And it's John Carpenter. I actually forgot this wasn't John Carpenter scoring it. He scores tons of his own films. And yet he handed this off to Ennio Morricone, who actually did another film's score I really loved, The Untouchables. I don't know if the Kevin Costner film about Elliot Ness. And so it's, I mean, everybody knows the big ones, John Williams, etc. Or Tim Burton. Like, you can recognize certain scores. I actually didn't realize that John Carpenter handed it off. So somebody that's doing a style that's very much him, but not him. Maybe that's why it's actually a little bit better. I don't know. He's a really skilled guy.
So, James, aside from the soundtrack, what are the things that kind of make this one stand out to you so much?
Oh, no, David first, because I could fill this whole podcast for an hour and a half.
You could fill the hour. So I have a much less history with this movie than you guys do. I saw it for the first time yesterday. But I will say this, though. One, grotesquerie is a word.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm going to use that like every day from now on. It's hard to find reasons to use it, but I'm going to find them. So I do want to reiterate the effects. I think that we, in modern times, it's all too easy to think like, oh yeah, you can just make anything happen. Movie magic is just so much easier now. And I say that not knowing anything about coding or programming. So I'm sure the nuts and bolts are not that easy, but it can look seamless now. And we can take that for granted. But where you go and you watch the average movie from the 80s or even the early 90s, in many cases, they're going to generally feel very dated. And granted, this one did feel a little dated, which is one way that I was so on board. I was like, clearly fake, but really good. And so that helped me a lot as somebody who's not really into this type of thing. I also appreciated that you mentioned Jaws earlier, James, that this reminded me a lot of Jaws in the sense of kind of using less is more, but not leaning on that too much. Probably because, Jaws there were reasons they had to do less is more. It was a, more of a practical thing. In this case, I think, and so what I mean by that, obviously less is more. This is a very graphic movie and has some very graphic moments, some of which are very early on. So it's unlike Jaws in that sense, where Jaws, waits for a long time to show you the shark. In this case, you are right out the gate seeing the thing. That was pretty shocking to me. That surprised me. I was like, I probably got about 45 minutes before I actually see whatever the thing is. Nope, right out the gate. You see it pretty early on.
Or the dog fence.
Right, yeah, exactly. but there's a whole lot of kind of building the tension with the distrust between people. And that's what I think I appreciated more. It wasn't, us versus the world. It was us versus one another. It was innately a story about mankind, a story about people trying to understand something and trying to figure it out and to trust one another. And I like that you're not really told all that much. You get sort of you don't really even have a narrator in this case. You just have sort of bits and pieces that you have to assemble. And then you have people who are, they're sort of telegraphing it a bit for the audience, but even their understanding is fairly limited. So I don't know. I think I enjoyed the type of storytelling a good bit. It was quite unique.
Yeah. Well, for me, years ago, I saw this first on television. So I saw an edited version, which even then, as
45 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Even as I probably didn't get to see it until I was a teenager, maybe late teens, but it was then like nothing I'd ever seen before, even what they showed on an edited version on television. Same thing, right around that same time, a friend and I used to sort of sneak videos. And I think we did rent it from the local video store. And so we did the same thing with Evil Dead 2 by Sam Raimi, which also just had a lot of practical monster effects. And I at that time really got a huge love of John Carpenter and these types of gore films, honestly, more than I should probably. And so but I was just fascinated by it's interesting to read the stories. Rob Bottin, the guy who did the effects, he got a little help from Stan Winston, which is more of a popular and known name. He worked on some of the Star Wars films, but Rob Bottin actually worked on this so hard and it was so grueling, he was hospitalized at one point. Just burnt out from trying to get all the effects done, trying to push for more money in the budget. And so this was a huge effort for him. So it's fascinating to read the history of this movie. But one thing I think that I like about this movie that I just don't see, I see in a few of the best movies, is that right from the get-go in the film, everything has a lived-in look and feel. I think now sometimes we watch movies like, I really like that person's outfit or their clothing or that's a cool coat. And if you really stop and think about it long enough, they kind of look new. Or they look like they're almost selling a brand. And like everything in this movie feels used, like people have lived in it and worn it for years. And like all the surroundings, they play the ping pong table. Nothing looks like sets. It looks like worn environments that people have inhabited and sweat in, and it looks dingy, and there's just a naturalness to it. And Jaws is the same way. That's why I often make a lot of comparisons. And then that bleeds into the relationships too. All the relationships feel lived in. Carpenter actually had 2 weeks of rehearsals, which was rare at the time, especially for the genre and horror. He wanted the characters to just hang out. Certain characters had conversations and decided even stuff that wasn't in the script, like we don't think our characters like each other. So when you see them, then they're inhabiting these roles and they're not telegraphing all the relationship stuff. Like there's a lot of things about the people we don't actually know. In fact, why are they even there? It's a research station, but it seems to be, it's just the skeleton crew for the winter. So you have to actually think through things because they don't explain it. One great example, MacReady's freaking weird hat. He's got that big, dumb, floppy hat. And I swear, in any other movie, some character would have to be, "Oh, MacReady, you in that hat." Or, "Why are you always wearing that stupid hat?" Or somebody would have to call it out almost for the viewer. Here it's just, he has this ugly, weird, dumb hat that probably Kurt Russell found somewhere and decided, but it's just there. Like you have to see it and chat about it with your friends. It's not, there's a lot of those nuances of the way characters dress, the way they interact. Why are they, there's a line about, El Capitan using his gun. It's like, well, what exactly do they think of him? Certain characters like Childs apparently have a reputation, but we don't really see why it was earned for having a bad attitude. It would be like walking into a room with people in real life and not knowing the dynamics and not having anybody, like you said, no narrator. Nobody's explaining to you all the relationships or how everything works. And I really like movies that do that. I think they're more, they enjoy more speculation and thought later versus a movie who explains all the relationships or has some cheap reason to get exposition in. So for some people, maybe that's aggravating. I don't know. Maybe for some viewers, they're like, I don't know who these people are, and I can't see. Maybe to some people that feels one-dimensional, but I don't think the performances are one-dimensional. So that's in it. Well, but that gets to, so I guess, was there anything we didn't like? Maybe throw the ball back to Kat. Anything about the movie we're like,
well, one of the things I didn't like might be a bit spoilery, so 1982, spoiler for the movie, I did not like that the dogs got killed.
Oh.
No. Dogs can't die in movies.
Dogs can't die! Does the dog die? It's tragedy.
Who let the dogs die?
And this also then, I will admit, James often teases me that I care more about the animals than people in movies. So that shows my bias there. So.
Well, how many movies really condition us to do that, though? Really, like Dances with Wolves, one of the most emotional scenes in the movie, you know, when the dog dies. And there's no shortage of those. And so you're just like, you know.
Yeah. Well, there's the other thing they called it's the dog petter syndrome. Like you sympathize a character by making them like animals. They could be the most horrible character, but if they pet the dog or feed the dog or take care of a dog, they're not so bad.
Save the cat, right? Yeah. Saving the cat. I think I've heard
Saving the cat. Yeah,
For our listeners, by the way, yes, she is more disturbed by pet deaths in movies.
Can they about to get some letters
Can they see air quotes in audio? I don't know. Wait.
Stop.
What about you, David? Did anything sort of pull you out?
You're gonna shore off some difficult conversations with people at church. That's a good move, though. Stuff that pulled me out. You know, I think that at first I was a bit annoyed that I'm like, well, why are they there? They're doing research, but they seem to have an awful lot of time to not do anything. It doesn't, you don't get really much of a sense of what it is they're doing. But I think after hearing your description of it a little bit more, I think, that actually maybe is more of a strength than not. Because if something like this comes up, you're everything else falls on the back burner. No one cares anymore what you're supposed to be there doing. And I think as well, it's interesting that the names, even the nicknames, things that aren't spelled out for us. We don't have the character who goes through. So this is not so much a negative. It's going back to what you were saying before. You don't have it's the new guy at the camp. We better walk him around and exposit everything to him, but mostly to the camera. And for that reason, we don't figure out why in the world they could call him Windows. And I'm a little bummed that we never got that. I thought, does it have anything to do with Windows computers? But that doesn't really make any sense.
Technically, then we had Kurt Russell's character named Mac, so we had Mac and Windows.
They could do like a Mac and PC ad from, back in the days when those were a thing. But no, I think that if anything, what I didn't like was stuff that I knew was going to be baked into the movie anyway, which is really gruesome stuff. Stuff I didn't like was stuff that this is not my genre. This is not my thing. So, I don't really have a lot of complaints, to be completely honest. How about you, James? Is there anything about this movie that didn't do it for you?
Well, I was going to go for just a big old nope, because I do love the movie. But I think as I have matured from my early 20s, when I was probably drinking wine coolers, to where I'm at now, now when I watch the movie and we meet Kurt Russell's character, McCready, and he pours that scotch down the computer. I think in my 20s, I was like, that's funny. He poured his drink down and blew up his computer. It's right at the beginning, so, spoiler. But that's like how you get introduced to his character. Now I watch that movie, I'm like, dude, J&B, come on. That is a waste of good scotch. So,
and a good computer, judging by 1982 standards of quality.
Do you want to play a game? Yeah.
This is what you have to entertain you for the entire winter. And now it's gone. So now I've got to go, well, I was going to spoil more about the movie. I almost did. That was bad. Now we got to go find some aliens to deal with. That's what I'll say.
Well, you know what? I was about to ask what was our favorite thing, whether that's a monster moment or another scene. But you know what? Maybe we should take a break. Maybe all of us take a blood test. And those of us that aren't one of the things will be back after the break, and we can talk about our favorite moment.
Up in the sky, look! It's a bird! It's a plane!
Cinemagog, The Marvelous Era. James Harleman here, the cinema guy, announcing the sequel to my first book on film and faith. Let's face it, entertainment has changed dramatically since the first book published in 2012, and comic book characters and franchises are everywhere. So I decided to set my sights on superheroes and examine the evolution of Hollywood in this follow-up to the first Cinemagogue book. For example, what does Loki tell us about culture's view of God? Why does the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Infinity Saga continually align with biblical themes? In the Marvelous era, I review each film and show not only how the individual movies express gospel parallels, but each phase essentially reveals a multi-point sermon. I also explore DC, Star Wars, the Monsterverse, and more. Without compromising scriptural truth, we can sift these stories and discover how we might reject, receive, and redeem ideas for personal reflection and Christian conversation. Also, has Hollywood's messaging gotten worse? The book explores ways these marvelous mythologies correspond with conversion, Christian living, church history, and Reformation, but I do also highlight what has been the entertainment industry's darker, indoctrinating decade, as well as toxic fandom and the dangers of immersion in pop culture that just might drown us spiritually if we're not careful. So suit up, assemble, and join me on a journey to the Infinity Saga and beyond. Cinemagogue, the Marvel Us Era. Coming soon in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle editions via Amazon.com.
10 years after a brutal war, former Navy SEAL Doyle in an armored bus prowls the broken remnants of a devastated America. Jonathan pastors a small church. When he meets Doyle, he sees an opportunity to expand his ministry. The two men strike a bargain. This journey will change them both in ways they could have never imagined, as Doyle's unbelief collides with Jonathan's faith. Eric Landfried's Solitary Man is an action-packed post-apocalyptic story with a solidly biblical worldview. This ambassador international release and its sequel, Conflicted Man, are available today. Order directly at ericlandfried.com.
Hey, this is James, and if you're listening to Popcorn Theology, it's because you're interested in movies, or theology, or best of all, both. And that probably means you're our kind of people, sharing things in common with our community and maybe sharing common interests our listeners and viewers would be interested in as well. So why not partner with us and advertise your business or ministry right here on Popcorn Theology? We're looking for great, like-minded sponsors and offer reasonable rates with a variety of formats to get your message out. Remember, our fans aren't mindless consumers, so they'll give you thoughtful consideration. That's a big part of what we're all about. So for more information on advertising with us, contact info@popcorntheology.com.
Well, we're back and talking about The Thing, one of James's favorite films, which means, as a result, I've now seen it over a dozen times. So it's time to go a bit deeper, but we are going to start with, did you have any favorite things, monster and or favorite moments in the movie that just really stood out?
Well, I'll start with that one. One of my favorite things, obviously, I think it may be a lot of people's, is when Norris's head turns into a spider. So much, in fact, which I will try to do for our listeners if they look at the Popcorn Theology Podcast Facebook page. I'll go ahead. I'll try to find and post the picture I have of a birthday cake that's actually a replication of that head, with pretzels for spider legs and everything else. So.
I was looking in the notes and it said birthday cake, and I was so confused. I was like, "Wait a minute, was there a cake scene in this movie? I don't remember any whimsy."
Oh no! I had Norris's spider head recreated as a cake for a horror themed birthday party one year. So,
yum.
So that probably the standout moment for me, but another thing, I guess something I noticed this time. Honestly, let's talk about that dog named Jed. By the way, Jed, the half Alaskan, half Malamute,
half Malamute, half wolf.
There you go. Creepiest dog ever.
Not
think about it. I can't imagine anyone even trying to do those dog scenes without just doing CGI these days. And here we have this dog, and he does these creepy stalking kind of wandering, and then he'll just stare.
It was the stillness. It was the stillness of the dog that I found super creepy. They just had him stop and stare at stuff, and Carpenter knew to let it breathe. Like, he would just rest the camera on the dog so that you understood how creepy it was. Because it went on for a long time, and you don't see those long takes that give that otherworldly feel.
Yeah. I think that would definitely ruin it for me if I had that type of dog or a dog similar enough. How much of their time do they just spend slowly walking around and staring at one thing and looking around? It's not that different for a domesticated dog to do. It's not that out of place, but it sure looks out of place when you give it screen time. When you let the camera rest on it, it seems odd. You're like, what is that dog doing? And then he goes into the kennel, and all the other dogs are laying there. I mean, yeah, there's something off about this one. That's for sure.
Even capturing that moment, like just how many times how did you get the dog to do that with the other dogs? And it's sitting down. It's such a strange, we take for granted. I mean, even just the big monster at the end of the film that pops up out of the hole, that took 50 puppeteers.
Wow.
To make happen. And like nowadays we just, like you said, I don't want to slight people who do digital graphics, but it doesn't take quite the on-site manpower that it used to in those days. So between dogs and CGI, man,
exactly, yeah. In my family, we had sort of a running joke whenever we'd see a movie and see some special effect or whatever. We're always like, "Wow, how did they do that?" To which my mom or dad would always say, "They pushed a button." It's
yeah,
and it's a little more involved than that. It's more like several 100,000 buttons. But in short, it is button pushing. This is a lot different than that. This is not just pushing a button. Especially when the dog, that scene, like that really like immerses you in the movie. Like for some reason, that was a lot more traumatizing than the stuff you see with the people later.
See,
well, not all
that's
of it,
what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, well, not just the dogs that got shot. Like that didn't bug me all that much, but it was more that this dog's freaking face split open, and I'm like, okay.
Well, I think in that sense too, that's the first time in the movie you see the grotesque body that they found, but you don't really understand what you're looking at, and it's still.
Yeah.
The dog sequence is the first time that the movie goes, oh, you have no idea what you're in for. And you have no idea what can happen. And at the time in 82, it was so unexpected. It was so out there in just what effects were able to accomplish that it was that much more of a visceral reaction and response to, I have no idea what's happening in this movie.
So it was that for you too, not the defibrillator scene?
Yeah, oddly enough, I think by then I was just like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he crawled up on this dude. Like, this isn't going to go well. One of those like, don't go in there. He went in there. Kind of things. But no, with the dog, that was and I guess maybe I was expecting, the dog's going to like shake and do something weird, and then like out, off frame, you're going to see something rise up. I don't know. I didn't. Let's put it this way: walking into this movie, I severely underestimated the practical effects, and I thought they're going to do a lot. And once I saw that, I'm like, oh my, there's a lot happening here. So, no, that was where were we going with that? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's just favorite moments or standout moments.
Oh, standout moments
that were.
Yeah, you nailed it.
So yeah,
okay.
You definitely nailed it.
Yeah, I can. I would add one more to it, maybe. But, so another standout moment to me was the tension of the blood testing scene. That one really stood out to me as far as, okay, this is a good idea, I think, but you don't even really know if it's going to work. For several of the blood tests, you're just like, I don't know. Maybe this doesn't. Whoever says this doesn't prove a dang thing. Maybe it doesn't, and then all of a sudden it does. Wow, that was a good scene. That really.
Did that visibly? Did you jump?
A little bit, yeah. I definitely. And I went back. Actually, I jumped, and then the great thing was I rewound it for a couple seconds because I was like, "Did I just see that?" Yep. Want to jump again now? So
nice.
So, Kathryn, what did you already go?
Well, I think one of my favorites is the head, but it's more the response to the head. Because at that point you're just like, I don't even know what to do at this point. So I like that response, and then another response that's actually become a bit of a Harleman staple in a weird way is the response of the captain after he's been proven to not be an alien, and he's kind of like, I don't know what you guys are doing, but I'd like to not spend the rest of the summer tied to this couch. And that just, I don't know, it just makes us laugh every time. And
Poor Gary.
Poor Gary.
Yeah. Can't catch a break in this movie.
Well, we've talked about it a little bit already, but it's been well documented. We're talking about 1982. So between interviews and discussions for decades, I mean, John Carpenter has had interviews in the aughts and in the teens. The central theme of the thing is not something we have to sort of ask and talk amongst ourselves. Everybody talks about paranoia and mistrust. I mean, fundamentally, it's about the erosion of trust in a small community, sort of in microcosm, instigated by paranoia that someone might not be who they say they are. And that, I mean, this isn't a movie where you have to stretch, like, I wonder if there are any themes in here, right? I mean, like, just your best friend may be your enemy. So it's the distrust that humans already have for somebody else, or betrayal by those we know, and then betrayal maybe even by our own bodies. So you've got this kind of staggered tier of fears about mistrust, paranoia, fear, even of self. And so it really doesn't matter. Some people I know, reading reviews back from the 80s, some reviewers are like, well, this must be reflective of AIDS because they've got, body and infection and fluids and yet John Carpenter, he acknowledged that, oh yeah, it kind of makes that connection, but it wasn't the intention. And so kind of, I think, like, in a weird way, the X-Men, in the way that it taps into, feeling or being different in its own way. Like, just like the X-Men have sort of a timeless reinterpretation for whatever's going on.
Right.
This can be interpreted as distrust of whatever the distrust du jour happens to be in our culture. David, do you have that quote from Kurt Russell handy?
Yeah, and so Kurt Russell, in talking about John Carpenter, said he and I worked on the ending of that movie together a long time. We were both bringing the audience right back to square one. At the end of the day, that was the position these people were in. They just didn't know anything. They didn't even know if they knew who they were. End quote. So I think it's kind of, yeah, I'm going to keep talking and say he didn't say all this. I think that it's very fitting because the scene that you get when they find the Norwegian station is one of just utter...
Hey, Sweden! Sorry.
Shout out. Just one of utter, confusion, horror and what in the world is happening. And the confusion that those people must have been experiencing, you get right back to it, this loss of identity. And it's kind of cyclical, really, in that sense. I mean, it wraps up, but given that there were more movies by this title, something tells me that maybe the thing did survive. And we never see it exactly die. So, who knows what happens from here. But people who have seen all the movies know, I suppose.
Well, shout out about the sequel is actually a prequel.
Oh, nice.
And it got mixed reviews. I personally enjoyed it because the director wanted to be really faithful. For those who even liked 10 Cloverfield Lane, it's Mary Elizabeth Winstead. And she's an American who flies out to be and actually visit this Norwegian camp. And it's what happens in the Norwegian camp. So so in one sense, how the movie's, a lot of how the movie's going to end. Because like down to why even things in this movie, as they walk around the Norwegian camp and you see an axe in the door, or you see the person who slit their wrists, like it's it's a different experience in movie watching because you're watching a prequel and certain things you know where they're all going to end up. I mean, I guess that's the same with the Star Wars prequels in some ways too. But then there are pieces and characters that you don't know. Like how is this going to go? So I enjoyed the prequel. It's also interesting to see the thing reinterpreted with CGI, with computer graphics. And so it's different. I wouldn't say it's an interesting exercise and not as good, but that doesn't mean just because something isn't as good doesn't make it bad. And so I enjoyed it as a film.
Nice.
And I think for some people, I think some people probably caught that in the theater and maybe went back and watched the old one, so win-win either way. So, but yeah, what we're dealing with, and that's where I think the theme is obvious, is fear of the unknown. And we've talked about how the movie feels lived in and doesn't telegraph everything. But when you actually start to really think it through, we never know the thing's motivation. We never know its intelligence level. We don't know how much, like, is a lot of it instinctual? Is it more like an animal? We don't even know what its ultimate goal is. I mean, we see Wilford Brimley. I mean, we see the diabetes man.
Stop.
Like, he projects what would happen if it consumed the whole world, but do we know that was its object? Like, we really don't. In fact, another thing, even Carpenter has been asked over the years, like, was that even its spaceship, or was that the spaceship of something it assimilated?
Oh, man.
So, like, there's so much that we just absolutely can't fathom. And just because the characters speculate a few things, like you said, the blood test, yes, it did work. So that one worked. But how much do they really know about the organism? I was reading an old 2012 review from Weird Fiction that said that the thing suggests a broader quandary, our way of gathering information and arranging it. For all the technological grandeurs it enables us to create, fails at answering some of the most important questions we can pose. So in the face of some mysteries, the scientific method even backfires. And by investigating this monster, these men not only learn nothing, they start to lose faith in the knowledge they thought they had of one another. The thing, the anomaly, the unknown shakes their certainties just as it should our own. I guess that's such a primal thing, is our lack of knowledge, or even even attacking the scientific method. It's like they can speculate, but how far does it really get you? You don't know this creature's motivations. That's a fear we all have. That's certainly before I was a Christian, or if for people who are agnostic. I mean, I don't know, that has to be a fear for someone that doesn't have any certainty in how in reality's foundation, right?
Most definitely. And I think the that fear of something that is so alien, that is so other, that it's difficult to understand it in like, you can hardly wrap your brain around what you're seeing. And that is a primal fear. And I think that this movie taps into some of that.
We don't like not knowing. I mean, I think you think that's something. I think that's something primal the movie's getting at, that has nothing to do with aliens or even necessarily death. I think we don't like not knowing.
No, you're absolutely right, and that plays out in so many ways, even with things that I love, like a systematic theology. I mean, a systematic theology is ultimately an attempt to try and understand God to the best of our ability with the information that he's given us. And yet, as it says in Isaiah, I am God, there is no other. I am God, there is none like me. And Paul says how unsearchable and how unscrutable are his ways. His ways are not our ways. His plans are not our plans. And I think that idea, we often chafe against that just at a primal level, right? I mean, it's some of what the fall was about. I don't want to do what you say. I don't want to do it your way. And I don't understand your plan. So if you won't tell me what it is, then you can't, I don't want to follow it. Is a primal thing that we see over and over again. And so, yeah, just that idea that we don't like to not know. And I think in some respects that we've seen that with other movies you guys have covered. And one of the things that, like James was talking about, that he likes about this movie is we don't know why they call him Windows. We don't know why MacReady has a weird hat. Like, it's not a plot point. It's a character thing. It's just a piece of this person's life, and you don't get to know everything about everyone. And yet we see then a bunch of people complain about, well, but what about this thing? It had to mean something. Did it? or does it have to mean something to you? It meant something to that character. Does it have to be a plot point that comes back around and is super meaningful and somehow ties into the ending and makes everything tie up together? Because then we'll complain that those things don't feel right either, right? It's the George Lucas syndrome. Darth Vader built C-3PO. Well, that's dumb. Right? Like, it's too tied together. It becomes too tied together. There's a balance to that.
It becomes simplistic.
Yes.
Just to make you feel, just to make you sleep at night.
Artificial closure, right? I mean, it's,
Yeah.
oh, good. I feel that I understand something, even if I, and it's funny. You mentioned, in this review, they mentioned, the scientific method failing them. So I don't feel like this is shoehorning as much as it usually is. But when it comes to scientific topics and disciplines, I mean, how many misconceptions are based around a desire to have certainty at all costs? I mean, an unfounded sense of certainty in something. And I think awesome thing about the scientific method properly applied is that it is self-correcting and it is based in doubt. It's assuming that, we're going to do our best. We're going to feel our way through this thing. We're going to try and understand it. But at its core, all we can really do is rule out one of these two options. We can't even rule in one of these options. All we can do is say, it isn't this or it isn't that. All we can really do is kind of try and make sense out of it. And so I think for that reason that as much flack as it often gets, the scientific method is actually quite in line with the biblical worldview for a lot of reasons. But ultimately, when you try to understand something about nature, something about God's general revelation to us, this place that we live, this universe that we inhabit, all these rules that we can describe, sometimes we become very uncomfortable with the unknown and we try to understand it in ways that are unsubstantiated and not good attempts to explain. And I'm trying not to get into specifics here, but because those are long separate rabbit trails. But that is a key and important thing, is fear of the unknown, that we are so opposed to that fear that we would rather fear something that we can know, even if it's not the right thing to fear. And then additionally, as you mentioned, as Isaiah said, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there's none like me. That really flies in the face of our attempts to understand things. We hit the limit of the scientific method, for example. You can't make a trend line with one point. It doesn't work. You can't observe a trend. You can't do a comparison with one. That's it. Not in any systematic scientific way. All you can really do is say that's just God. He just does that. That's what are you going to do? I mean, we can try and understand him and explain him, but our finite minds are going to fail, and we have to become as comfortable as we can in that uncertainty, because there are certain things that are just too great for us, too wonderful for us, and in glory, when we're not looking dimly through a mirror, then we'll have a better handle, but until that point, we live on this fallen world. So what are we going to do?
Even, if you think about some of the stuff with the garden, the initial sin and the initial temptation was knowledge. You will have knowledge. You will become like God. And there's a lot of times where knowledge, or the desire for knowledge, is actually a desire for control. If I can understand this thing, I can control it, manipulate it, use it.
Yeah.
And so we don't like being the ones that are being used. And we definitely don't like not being at the top of the food chain. And I think the thing knocks us down a block, and that is humbling and terrifying at the same time.
Well, it's H.P. Lovecraft for anyone who maybe likes The Thing and doesn't know Carpenter's influence, or hasn't heard of H.P. Lovecraft. As a writer, he would write horror stories, but they were a little bit more atypical. Some people called it archaeological horror, because it's more like you'd find something and you'd be studying it, and the horror came out of understanding what it had been. At the Mountains of Madness is a little bit like that. Not that there's no imminent danger in the story whatsoever, but John Carpenter was definitely influenced by Lovecraft, and he's the guy who conceived of the Cthulhu mythos, and that term gets used a lot. But somewhere between science fiction and aliens and sort of a mystical other dimensional creature. A lot of Lovecraft's writings were that there were these things beyond our understanding. More Twilight Zone, Rod Serling, right? There's a fifth dimension. There is something ethereal, unknowable, and otherworldly about it that to actually even to look in the face of it basically would drive you insane.
Yep.
And so ultimately, like, the terror is that it is unknowable, or if you knew it, that would break your brain. And that's Carpenter's inspiration was some of those writings, and this and some of his other movies. Actually, he actually did In the Mouth of Madness with Sam Neill, which is another has some body horror and some weird stuff going on.
And that's heavily influenced by Lovecraft, that particular film.
And so this is what was feeding that idea of the thing. And I go back to, we are told, and nobody loves these verses these days, but it's like the beginning of wisdom and the beginning of knowledge is fear. Fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord.
Yeah.
I get it. I think as Christians, we rush too quickly to, and perfect love casts out fear, and Jesus loves us. And so it's like, well, right.
And it's not that kind of fear. Right. Yeah.
Right. But it's like, no, fear of there is uncertainty. There is scare. I have to trust. I do not get all the answers. I cannot possibly know. And there is something like, we should just be able to be very more open with that. It's like, yeah, no, there's fear there. That feels shaky. Like I'm told to depend on him as a foundation and not me. That makes me feel very finite, shaky, and
small,
tremble. Like so. And I here we're comparing God to the thing, and obviously this thing in the movie seems to have far more nefarious intentions. But I think it evokes that same great internal fear of that lack of control. If I can't understand it, I'm paranoid that I can't be on top of it, and that's always going to be. Even the non-Christian can agree. Just from a creature, a cat referred to that. If we're not the apex, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
For the Christian, it's like, well, if there's a God, I'm not the apex, so I may be in trouble. Unless
And I think too, then to move on to another point that this movie speaks to is our identity, fear of each other. Do I really and that mistrust of the other, but the other that then looks like me? But how do I know who that person is? And then as the film gets even deeper, it asks the question, how do I even know who I am? Like, if I was a thing, if I got assimilated and it had my memories and my understanding, would I even know or realize that I was now a thing? And so then even that rug gets kind of pulled out from under you. Like when someone is revealed to be other, what do you do? And what is your identity, and what do you base those things on, and how then do you trust? And what's interesting to me about this particular film is it actually starts not with happy joy, everybody's super friends at the beginning of the movie. There's already a mild antagonism that's going on in this skeleton crew. You have yes, there are no women, but
boo.
But you also don't have the traditional male camaraderie that one might expect. And you have MacReady, who is already sleeping out in a shack away from everybody else. So he's already set himself apart for one reason or another. We don't know why. There's people who don't seem to trust who might be the highest ranking guy there, Gary, but there's a lot of derogatory things made toward him. There's antagonism between the cook and the other guy that's like, I'm trying to sleep, turn it down. And the guy doesn't even turn the music, doesn't even touch the dial to turn it down. You have Childs and MacReady who...
to be fair, he waved his hand by it.
You have Childs and MacReady who says... Child says, I'm going to take on the leadership role, and everybody seems to go, oh, no, that's not a good idea. But you never get why. They never delve into why. Those are just lived-in relationships of mild antagonism that's already there. So then when you throw those people who already don't necessarily trust each other, and you throw the thing into the middle, the freaking grenade goes off. And and it dissolves from there. The utter lack of trust, the utter lack of understanding, and then how do you face something if you can't be unified?
If only this mirrored real life somehow.
Yeah, no, for sure. It definitely stands out. And I guess I don't realize it until I hear it pointed out, like you said, that there's really no sort of we're in this together type thing that you might see. And I wonder, they say nothing unifies like a common enemy. Well, in this case, the common enemy is undermining and driving division. It's not really, they're not unified against it in any sort of cohesive way. It's against it very briefly, and then, it can become us. Then it's Mexican standoff for the rest of the movie.
It turns into, it's every man for himself, and even every blood cell for himself. I mean, even the thing itself doesn't necessarily show itself to be wholly unified. Like we still, again, we don't know how it operates, or if it's a hive mind, or if it has its own form of community, but it definitely, like, pieces of it literally peel itself off and try to get away. And so there's this real interesting lack of unity that the movie plays with as well, and just an utter lack of mistrust. So then that's a fear, right? How do we know that someone is what they say they are? How do we know that I can trust this person that I'm walking through life with? And that can be
Let's see, we need the blood test, the theology test.
The political test. Yeah, make sure you believe all the right things, is me. I think it's interesting as well. And I wonder if perhaps one of the motivating factors here, and maybe I'm over applying the fact that this was, released in 1982, but could there have been some, sort of remnant, Cold War mentality there of mistrust, who's a communist, who you never know that they could be right among you. They could be your friends. They could be, and I mean, do you guys know if there was any, discussion?
The short story it's based on, Who Goes There, was written, that author wrote it at the time in the idea of communism.
Yeah.
So you tapped into it without even knowing it. It was intuitive.
Yay.
Like the short story that got adapted, which was quite a bit older. And that goes back to the 50s. So you got McCarthyism.
Oh my goodness.
So
I think the original story was actually the 30s, and then the original story was the 30s, and then the movie, which was the thing from outer space.
The first film was 51. Yeah.
Was 51.
Yeah.
And then this one was 1982, and this one was actually much more in keeping with the actual book. It was a lot more faithful to the book, character names and plot points.
The 50s, they couldn't quite get the.
I think in the 50s they didn't really like the nihilism, the bleak nihilism.
One, you just had a dude in a suit, so. But so this they could finally do the monster. But it's kind of interesting. But you're not wrong. So the 50s when it first got made, and then the 80s. It's interesting how cyclical some of the same theme was about the concerns about communism, and so it did creep around several times. That was its core.
Yeah. I mean, and even today, if you wanted to say, I like to use the example of the X-Men. I think that's perfect because is the X-Men all about gay rights? Well, it kind of became that for a time, but it wasn't necessarily the entire time. It's about whatever oppressed group or perceived to be oppressed group feels excluded and finds camaraderie together. Similar type of thing here. I mean, somebody, if this were released today, people would be speculating, who's the they that it's in reference to? I mean, could it be that, you don't know where the conservatives might be or the liberals for that matter? I mean, it's ideas, and that's the interesting thing to me, I guess. It's underlying motivations, worldviews, ideas, commitments. It's these are the unseen aspects. It's not flags and banners and being at war. It's the underpinnings of that, your foundations. So that's really quite fascinating and very fitting for popcorn theology.
Well, I'll tell you too, it's just interesting based on the last few years of pastoring I've been exposed to. And I mean, longer than the last couple of years, honestly. I remember, 10 years ago, having a conversation with a younger man who was struggling with whether or not he wanted to know, he was trying to figure out from a Reformed theology perspective. So like, what if his whole question actually was, what if I'm not elect? Like, what if I'm not saved? What if I am something other than I think I am? Or what if I'm not? And it's actually, I think we wonder. That was a unique situation of somebody actually doubting their own. So it was like, what if I'm a thing, right? That's, but oftentimes we run into that with one another too. I mean, just to be totally frank, I mean, in the life of any pastor, like I have known people who have seemingly quite ardently professed that they're absolutely on Team Jesus, and they're one of us. And then fast forward 2 years later, and sometimes fast forward just a weekend later, and bam, like Palmer's blood test turning out negative, and then blah blah, like that. Somebody's gone from believer to atheist in 30 seconds, and you're like, well, but wait, I was so certain that person, I thought their faith was stronger than mine. Like, how are they not one? Like that. I think that this is like, the thing actually taps into something that's a uniquely Christian fear as well. Is how do I know who's saved? How do I know who's on the team? Oh my goodness, what do I do? How does it realign my entire life if boom, the spiritual blood test turns out, oh my goodness, they've been faking this whole time? This is a fear and mistrust that I think happens in the church that we don't like to think about, but it's very real. And I think it's not even paranoia. There's a certain reality to it. You talk about the visible church versus the invisible church. Like who's on any given Sunday, some there are in and some are not. And I think that's unnerving to some people at various stages in their walk. Maybe some of us even when we don't admit it.
And I think it's interesting that we're troubled more by one than the other. We're more troubled by those who profess faith and seem to show fruit and then, reject it, far more than those who just kind of conveniently profess faith but don't really show any fruit. And we're just like, oh, well, yeah, they're probably not a believer, and that's sort of obvious. I do think it's interesting that that we draw that distinction. And in case anyone is interested in that topic further, we have a really good interview, in fact, regarding this topic. Just look up our Derek Webb episode. And I don't mean to throw the man under the bus, but he's incredibly outspoken about his shift in his beliefs. So, it explores that a good bit. And I mean, and to this day, I listen to his older stuff with a great deal of conviction, and it's so surreal, in many ways. So yeah, go listen to our Derek Webb episode and go listen to his older stuff, I guess would be my short plug there. Anyway, sorry. Go on.
Oh no. Well, I mean, Jesus in Matthew 15, he's quoting Isaiah 29. So either place you get kind of the same verse, but he's talking about people who honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And it's like there is that fear in the thing. It's like everybody's, I'm human. No, I'm on the team. It's like, but some people have, well, all you need is a defibrillator to see their hearts are far from you, and they're going to chomp your arms off, like just like that. Like they're very different. I was thinking of Jude 1:4. It says, certain people have crept in unnoticed who long ago were designated for condemnation, ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into sensuality and deny our only Master and Lord Jesus Christ. I mean, I think the church faces a hurdle where we don't want to live in a paranoia and, well, I mean, witch hunting is now that's a term for a reason.
Right, yeah.
It's a metaphor now because it had a reality. Like, we don't want to witch hunt. And spend all our time like, who's in, who's out? Is he really saved? Is his heart in the wrong place? I mean, we can live in a place of paranoia where these guys find themselves, and we're absolutely not supposed to do that. So like, how do we find a place where we know that's going to be a reality? People will reveal that their hearts are not just with us. They are not who we thought they were, and yet we can deal with it. That's not easy, because honestly, I mean, because what it does is you think about just the case of the movie, like when that betrayal happens or that revelation happens, it's not just your opinion of a person. It's like it resets the whole narrative of our intertwined lives together. Like, oh, So this whole time you were actually, wait, what does that do to that changes our story, that changes my story, it changes your story, it changes our community's story. It really does shake things up in an intense way. So I think that's a fear. I think the theme taps into that fear, and I think that does transcend. I mean, that could be another religion. That could be a community where that could be a spy. Like this does. Naturally, we gravitate toward the spiritual realm, but this could be a betrayal or a revelation of a difference on massively different levels. Like, Kathryn could tell me tomorrow, James, I've been patronizing you. I hate horror movies. No, like all those experiences we've had.
What about those times?
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely gets into weird spaces. And so then how do you protect yourself or your community in that, right? I mean, because Blair does something. You were talking about that.
I mentioned the idea that Blair is actually the only one. That would be Wilford Brimley for those watching at home or listening at home.
Or diabetes.
Yeah.
It's the mustache. He didn't have a mustache.
Gosh. The character's name is Blair.
Blair.
He seems to be the only one. I mean, McCready does maybe a little bit, but Blair's the one who recognizes the threat and actually takes action to protect everyone outside of their camp. Now, and that was interesting. He appears irrational to the other members of the team because he just starts smashing up the radios and he takes out the choppers and all this kind of stuff. And they don't fully understand why. But he's the only one that said, this thing is a threat. This is something that we cannot understand or contain. And yet we need to do our best to protect those outside. So he actually takes on a self-sacrificial role and sentences himself and those close by because he can't tell who's a thing or not. But he says there is a sacrifice that needs to occur to protect others, to keep this thing from getting to the rest of the world. And he seems to be the only one that,
he's the prophet,
that thinks that way.
Yeah. Everybody
else is like, well, we can figure it out. We can control it. We can isolate it. We can stop it. And then we get saved and we can get out. And he's like, no, that's not how this is going to go.
Well, and when you look at it later, I mean, ultimately McCready does the same thing. Like, None of us are getting out of here alive. I guess we just need to do this. So like the default is they wind up doing his plan and actually stopping him at that point because now he's the Blair thing.
Right. And it's sad because, he does become the Blair thing. And even at the end, it's kind of funny because you think, okay, McCready he thinks that he's gotten everything contained and he's ready to die. He's just going to freeze to death. And then he sees Childs and you can tell he's kind of like, man, now I got to stay awake a little bit longer to make sure that this thing isn't a thing.
Yeah.
And, but he does take on that understanding. McCready does actually get to that point. He just gets there a little bit behind Blair. No, we need to sacrifice ourselves to protect everybody else.
I'm okay now. Can I come inside? I made a noose that's here right in plain sight in front of you.
I know, right? Now. Are we not going to address the noose?
Anybody?
Not at all. No one's addressing the noose.
But I think too, then it gets into those ideas like I spoke of identity and how do we understand our identity? How do we express that identity, one might argue?
I'm curious for David. David, how, looking at the thing, did you think that all of the people who wound up being things knew they were things? How did you interpret it first time?
That's the thing. I assumed
that is the thing.
There's so much thing in this. I thought that, first of all, going back to the ignorance thing, there's so much we don't know. What exactly is their goal? They assimilate. My thought is, okay, when you assimilate, the goal is to hide. But then it assimilates as the dog perfectly, and then it turns into this freaking monster. Why exactly? What was the plan? What was the end game there? What was the goal? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. The same with all the people that the thing assimilates. If it wants to do it well, then you would never know. But instead, they keep turning into these little, they keep turning into monsters. So that didn't make a ton of sense. I suppose I was under the impression that they would know if they became the thing, or that the thing would copy them. Maybe that's what I was assuming for well, that's definitely what I was assuming at first in the movie, was that, oh, it's making a copy of them. And at some point they're going to encounter one another. No, didn't happen. Or they're going to find the bodies of the people. And that's why Mac's shirt was ripped. That was actually Mac. And the Mac that is back there is a separate but thing version of him. Now, it was definitely confusing. But I was under the impression, yeah, they're on a team. They must know which ones are things and which ones aren't, and maybe they're trying to act, as a team to try and preserve one another. No, they didn't seem to have any sense of that whatsoever. But again, were either of the two at the end things? They passed the blood test, did they become things after? I don't know. In short, I'm comfortable with the ignorance. Let's put it that way.
Well, it seems to prefer absorbing or consuming the thing and then spitting out a copy, right? Or consuming the victim and then spitting out a copy. But then they speculate that they should eat their own food because theoretically, getting particles or something in you, it could start to replicate inside. So my own theory, which a lot of people speculate about this movie and play it different ways, is that, well, wait, if you ate some bad food and then some of its cells started to take over yours, and would you know that if it was taking you over slowly, cells at a time inside, you might not know. That's why some people think Norris doesn't. I mean, Norris still has a heart condition, or he's having pains inside and winds up collapsing, and then of course that thing is inside his chest and bites off the arms. Did he know? Because at one point he even turns down taking the gun, which at that point he would have been infected. So I think maybe there's a both and. Like you can get devoured and then a copy made, or it can copy from within and slowly take you over and just convert you. Conversion. Yeah. There you go. But then that gets to John Carpenter. Actually, some of the actors asked him apparently, like, if I'm a thing, do I know I'm a thing? And he actually wouldn't tell them. And his point was it didn't matter because if you knew you were a thing, you would still act perfectly like the other person. So he didn't want them acting, slightly malevolent he didn't want them acting any differently than they would if they were the person. So he wouldn't tell them whether or not they would know or not. And like that, again, that's just such a bizarre way of presenting it that keeps everything in question. But then it leaves both even the actors and the viewers like, would I know myself? Would I know that I'm a copy? Would I know that I'm an imitation? Or at some point would I actually be fully aware and there's something else that would activate, right? In moment of crisis or survival mode, something might rip out and I'd explode. And and that brain that's operating like me that's been assimilated would be gone at that point. But I mean, it gets down to the idea of being self-deceived, which is that last one, right? And it's funny, Blade Runner came out on the same day, and that's the whole thing. Like, am I a replicant? Like, can a replicant be made and given memories in such a way that it doesn't even know that it is a fake human in Blade Runner? It's interesting, like that seemed to be something being dealt with right there in that era. I mean, still a great question today, but it seemed to be recurring as a theme in some stories then.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, The Thing actually came out just a few weeks after E.T. And I mean, these two movies could not be more diametrically opposed in tone, and some of even what they're dealing with, and yet it's funny that these similarities to Blade Runner, those questions of identity, those questions of how do we judge truth, right? There was the idea in Blade Runner of fake memories that were implanted, and how then did she know or not know that she was a replicant? And Roy saying, well, all these memories are they're going to be gone. And does that make them worthless? And The Thing then dealing with ideas of identity and mistrust, and that just sort of buried in amazing body horror. It's taken me a while. It's taken me quite a few viewings to understand why The Thing on the surface seems to be just this grotesque horror show, but why do people keep coming back to it? Why is it that this movie came out and 30 years later people are still talking about it? I think that it seems like a simplistic tale, but it's actually getting at things that are very psychologically and philosophically unsettling, which is why James wanted to do it for Popcorn Theology. I mean, it's a movie that kind of it gets under your skin, for lack of a better term. The thing. It asks those questions, even if it does it very subtly. And so you ponder it and you think about it and you're trying to figure out, what is it about this? And there was an interesting quote. Anna Powell wrote a book called Deleuze and a Horror Film. And she talks about the fact that the thing doesn't appear to have a shape of its own, existing instead as an endless bodily flux when it's not mimicking someone that it's absorbed. So it's this anomalous thing produced by the conjunction of singularities in a monstrous entity in perpetual motion that is then unfixed in its identity. So even the thing itself, you don't know, what does it actually look like? What is its purpose? What would it be if it was just there by itself, doing whatever it wanted to do? What would it do? And we don't know that, because it's constantly morphing. Yeah. And that's interesting too, because then we don't know where it's going to go, or what it's going to do, or even what it wants. Right? In a lot of horror films, you have that moment where you're kind of like, oh, I figured out what it wants. The ghost wants this. It wants its murderer to be brought to justice, or the alien just wants to go home, or this has none of that. There's nothing that you can't appease it. You can't assuage whatever it's doing, because you literally can't figure out what it wants or what its purpose is. And that in itself is kind of terrifying.
And I think it's interesting as well that, it makes me wonder, what did it look like when they dug it out of the ice? And I'm sure the prequel explores that, but you don't see what it looked like when they dug it out of the ice. Well, it couldn't have looked like a human, but when you see it later on, it takes on these sort of humanoid forms-ish. And then it also has a lot of the sort of remnant dog appearances in that, in those final scenes. You're like, okay, so it seems to have remembered something about, it borrows from its previous hosts, if if, assuming that they were all, descended in some way and they didn't just encounter them by going to that site. And so I find it interesting as well. I mean, could there be something of an analogy here to, this sort of man-made set of morality, this man-made worldview and code that, we borrow these elements of things that we're familiar with. We don't really have a basis. We don't have anything to ground them in, as opposed to, no, this is we have an innate humanity and we share these appearances because of that innate humanity. The thing shares those appearances because it leached them off of innate humanity and innate dogmanity as well. And we don't really see any sort of certainty in itself. I mean, to extend the distrust and uncertainty to another dimension. I mean, it must not be very pleasant to be the thing.
It has its own dogma, is what you're saying.
Kind of to piggyback on some of what you're saying, then, that idea that it's making a copy of things that it probably doesn't really understand. And while it looks right, it's actually monstrous.
Yeah.
I think you're onto something there. I had never thought about it. I mean, I think we live in an era right now that wants to abandon all the foundation of all the Judeo-Christian Western principles that have been established, and that many people, they presuppose a wealth of those ideas, but they abandon the source, and then they also kind of pick and choose which pieces. They start abandoning pieces of the morality. So yeah, you wind up with weird dog hands with a couple human faces, and it suddenly doesn't look beautiful at all anymore. It looks monstrous, and it in that sense, almost in culture becomes the thing, and because it's rootless in its identity. It really it's just a gross amalgamation of a bunch of things that may have been good, but now all squished together with an amalgam of presuppositions is just a mess. I hadn't actually thought of that.
Yeah, it's like a camel, a horse made by committee. It's just.
I kind of wonder though, like watching this movie, I felt not self-conscious, but wondering, all right, is this sometimes what people fear when they think about Christians or becoming a Christian? Kind of, if you flip that in the other direction, like, well, what do they think? What does maybe culture think as they watch the thing? Like, are they thinking in terms of cults where everybody, one of us, we become assimilated and become the same,
The greater good.
the greater good. Totally. I was reading some verses, which if you watch the thing and read, you could actually find terrifying. Like 2 Corinthians 5, from now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, behold, the new has come. You've been absorbed, and now a copy's been spit out, right? That Galatians 2, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Like the tagline for this film is, man is the warmest place to hide. So there is an idea in Christianity of how we are, we're seeking to be imitators of Christ. There's imitation. We are striving to be set apart and be these new creations. It's like I'm watching the thing wondering, is that what they think that Christians get sucked in, assimilated, and now they're all these just copies of people acting that Christian way that they think is freaky? I want to talk to some atheists and agnostics and be like, when you watch the thing, do you think that's religious people or Christians? Like, what do you think?
That's a really good question. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, really, it's not hard for any of us to view the other in that way. And is that a fair comparison? I would say no. Probably not at any point, but perhaps at a subconscious level, does our worldview, become what we behold type thing? I think that there's probably something to that on a subconscious level, although not at the level that we're describing here, where you lose all sense of personal identity. But yeah, I mean, if that's your notion of Christianity, yeah, it is innately unsettling, and yeah, for sure.
Well, I granted, yeah, misunderstanding, and too, I think some people believe you give up all your individuality, you give up all your. I think that's a fear of a convert. I mean, and I remember too, like there are things about me that I thought were essentially me that I didn't want to let go of. That being a Christian meant I had to let go of. So in one sense, it's almost like you're losing parts of self. But it's like, well, but yeah, I mean, obviously the Christian view would be, well, that's corrupted self, that's a broken self, that's depraved self, that's a wretched self that needs to be like, yeah, the old man needs to be put to death. In some very positive and beautiful ways, so that we can be something other. And so it's fascinating to think, oh, wow, I wonder if people have a misconception of what it is. If my identity is so rooted in things that ultimately our God and Creator would say are products of the fall and products of our brokenness, if we want our brokenness to define us, I mean, if we want our sin and our sinful proclivities to define us, well, yeah, in one sense, it seems like to give that up would be losing identity and being sort of consumed and spat out as something other. I guess that the question is, when you're dealing with an extraterrestrial entity that seems to have no compunction about killing dogs. I mean, we know it's evil. We are talking about apples and oranges. I think somewhat that's probably what H.P. Lovecraft was dealing a little bit with his writings about Cthulhu and old elder gods asleep but planning to wake again someday, and a lot of these things that influenced Carpenter and this film. I think there is some of that fear of God that is misplaced, and that idea of loss of self and pride in self, like there could be negative things there too. So I think this film, as much as I obviously love it, like it could fuel some negative views of ways in which we do need to cast off our identity and be remade, reborn, literally. So I could see how it could have some negative reinforcements that I'd want to make sure weren't part of why people enjoyed it. I guess that would be, I work, as much as I want people to engage culture and enjoy films like this, it's like, well, it could subtly reinforce negative things about identity, negative things about positive things about rebirth. It's interesting. The older I get and the more nuanced I think about some of these things, it's like, I want to make sure I can see how this could fuel mindsets that could be obstacles to the gospel as well. So that's why it's important to have these conversations.
For sure. I think as well that if you consider I read an article recently that was specifically talking about Thanos and Endgame. It was from a biblical worldview, and the author used the phrases warm fear of God and cold fear of God. And I love that. I love that language because, and I may have to link the article because it's the warm fear of God is this awe, this sense of wonder that we, it's the Job, 38 through whatever chapters, where were you when I laid the foundations? It's this majesty and this awe and this wonder. But then there's the cold fear of God. What if I'm not who I think I am? What if it doesn't work out for me? He flooded the entire planet and killed everyone on it. Cold fear of God. Those the Old Testament, slaying of people. That cold fear that even as believers we can feel from time to time. When you have such an unknown God who he makes himself known to us, of course, but he's unknowable, unsearchable in so many ways. I think a bit of cold fear mixed in with the warm fear makes a lot of sense. But with that being said, we are certainly called to dwell on the warm fear of God. And so I should probably link the article because I'm probably butchering even the application of it. But I think that you're right. These are the reasons these conversations are good. Not because every movie walks away with has the viewer walk away with a good handle on things, or with this is good, this is bad, this is redeeming, this is a cautionary tale, and all of it being so simple. This is a great movie, a great example of a movie that makes you find the lines and tease out the differences, and ultimately in the end you end with more uncertainty, and that's more similar to life than we'd like to admit more often than not.
Well, and I think it's fascinating too, just another aspect of popcorn theology and the drive behind engaging movies in this way is that even the creators of the films themselves are often searching, struggling with themes and understanding, and some of them creating these movies is them working out their own issues with some of these ideas and themes. And Carpenter himself actually considers The Thing the first in what he calls his apocalyptic trilogy, which it consists of The Thing, a movie called Prince of Darkness, which definitely deals with a lot of supernatural and spiritual themes. It's not a great film, but a lot of horror aficionados consider it somewhat underrated. And then In the Mouth of Madness, which heavily deals with kind of the Lovecraftian monsters and stuff, but it also deals with what is reality and what creates reality, what makes reality, what holds the fabric of reality together. And could it be a story is what holds the fabric of reality together. And so so even within movies that are very viscerally shocking and have a lot of gore and horrific things that happen, they are dealing very clearly with some spiritual issues. And it's fascinating then to see a creator kind of working that stuff out in their art. And that's why popcorn theology exists, is trying to engage both the creator and ourselves through that art, and to find the Lord, find conversations, find those threads that connect us together and tease them out.
Absolutely. That's a really good note to end on. We should probably wrap it up.
Yeah. Thanks for indulging one of my favorite films, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So everyone keep the conversation going in the Popcorn Theology Patron Saints group and wherever else you talk about movies. And in the meantime, keep engaging media from a godly worldview. And remember, you are not a mindless consumer.
I'd like to not spend the rest of this thing tied to this couch.
Episode's still going. Won't last long, though.
Neither will we.
How will we make it?
Maybe we shouldn't.
If you're worried about me...
If we've got any surprises for each other, I don't think we're in much shape to do anything about it.
Well, what do we do?
Why don't we just wait here a little while, see what happens?
Thanks for watching this episode of Popcorn Theology. For more content, subscribe on YouTube. Follow and interact on social media to help broaden the conversation. Check out our archive of past episodes at popcorntheology.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and consider becoming a patron saint by supporting us on Patreon, which lets you interact, influence, and enjoy exclusive bonus content.